Hi there, I'm Peter Millard, and in the 10-minute workshop this week, we're going to take a look at expensive tools and diminishing returns. That's coming up next. So if you follow me on Instagram, or if you don't, perhaps you might want to consider that, because I post quite a lot there. Or indeed, if you support the channel through Patreon, and if you do, thank you very much indeed. You'll have seen that I bought a Lamello Zeta P2, a fancy biscuit jointer. Never owned one of these before. But while I was buying it, it occurred to me that it was actually more expensive than my first van when I first started working for myself, doing handyman type stuff. I was running around in the family car. It quickly became apparent that I needed a separate vehicle, so I picked up a cheap van, scraped sort of 1,200 quid or so together, and this Lamello Zeta is actually more expensive than that. And looking at those pictures of the old van, you might think that I got a better deal with the Lamello, but to be honest, and to be fair, those van pictures were taken after 8 hard years of use. I'd like to see what this Lamello is like after 8 hard years of use as well. But it did bring home starkly the notion of diminishing returns, the idea that you get less out of something the more you put into something. And that holds true for production. It also holds true for the purchases of any gear, whether it's cameras and audio equipment, sporting goods, vehicles, or indeed tools. Of course, depending on where you are in the whole process, the cost of those diminishing returns may seem crazy. But let's draw this out on a little chart here. Where are we? About here. So this is our convenience axis, and this is our cost axis. We've got pounds and dollars and convenience. So let's say you start, get that fitted. Yeah, let's say you start with dowels. You don't have anything fancy. You're just using dowels here. Well, it's not very convenient, but it doesn't actually cost you much. And then you move up to, say, a little pocket hole jig. Yeah, suddenly that's cost you a little bit more, but your convenience has gone up. Then you do that for a while and you move on to biscuit jointer. Well, suddenly your costs go up quite a lot, but your convenience goes up as well. After a little while with your biscuit jointer, well, then you get a domino. Now suddenly your costs have gone up massively and the convenience hasn't gone up that much. And then we get to tools like the Lamello Zeta. Well, now your costs are going up spectacularly and the convenience hasn't gone up that much. If you're back here, this sort of convenience cost might seem insane, but if you're here, this can actually make some sense. What's the benefit of this Zeta P2? Is it going to be worth it? I don't know, to be perfectly honest. And the benefit certainly isn't the cost of consumables going forwards. I know a number of people got interested in the Maffel Doweler because the cost of dowels was relatively cheap. But the cost of these consumables in comparison to my standard sort of 5x30mm dominoes, well, these Lamello Tenso fittings are almost 20 times the price, 70 odd pence a pair as opposed to about 3 or 4 pence for the domino. So it's certainly not the cost of consumables going forwards. But despite the almost 20 times sort of headline, the actual cost isn't that great. Yes, they're much more expensive than dominoes, but they do so much more, and they are still, less than £1 each. How many of those am I going to use in a cabinet carcass or a wardrobe carcass? Well, probably not that many. Certainly less than 20 quid's worth, and 20 quid's worth of fittings in a job of that type, provided that it's priced correctly, is neither here nor there, to be honest. So really it's about time and it's about convenience. So time, of course, is one of those finite things. You can't buy it, you can't earn it. All you can hope to do is save it and use it wisely. How is this sort of fancy biscuit jointer going to help save me time? Well, I think it will, because of a variety of clever little things, and I'll show you a few of them shortly. But the party piece for this particular Zeta P2, and I assume there was a P or a P1, is that instead of just being a regular biscuit jointer, as you plunge the blade in, when it reaches a certain depth, it does a little sort of hop up and down, and that carves out a sort of semicircular T-slot, and the connectors slide into that, these Tenso and Climax connectors, without any real sort of fixings. You put glue in some of them. The Tensos, the Climax are designed to be knockdown fixings. But they are quick and easy to use for the time that I've played with it so far anyway. And they are real time savers, and any time saved, of course, can be spent elsewhere. There are other fixings too, Divario and other things, and we'll come to those later on. But I had a quick play with this earlier on. I'm just going to show you some of the bits and pieces that I did then. So first up, this is the Tenso fitting. You can see the little fingers here. What I'll do actually, I'll just pop a clamp on that, so keep it down. All that happens is, again, we just work off pencil marks as before. These just go in and press home like that. Like that. That's a pretty solid fixing, but to get that out requires a lot of pressure. In fact, you have to sort of spring it out. If you just try to pull it, there is a little bit of wiggle room in these. If I just try to pull that, you can see the whole thing, it's actually lifting the whole MFT up. So yeah, by the time you've got some glue in there as well, they reckon adding glue into the fitting increases the tensile strength by 30%, which is pretty amazing. The other one that they do, the Climax, and again I've just sort of thrown these together really quickly. Oops. You have that one goes into there. Let me show you that. And the other thing I've been playing with recently is using the Climax connectors, the knockdown fittings, for miters. And these work incredibly well with the little jig that's supplied in the kit. And just pop these together, a quarter turn. And that's a mitre, absolutely solid and absolutely perfect. So yeah, pretty solid performance. First impressions of the Zeta P2. I don't expect this to replace my Domino, by the way. I expect to use the Domino in conjunction with this. Not necessarily on the same joints, although I'd be interested. That's a pretty strong joint for a mitre, but if you wanted something stronger, I think putting dominoes in through the sides as well may make for a stronger joint. You can get 80 kilos of clamping pressure off those Climax connectors. That's pretty impressive. So yeah, you know, lots of interesting options to look at going forwards. In fact, I'll be using my Domino later on to join some narrow rails together that the Lamello couldn't get a look in, because at its heart, it's a biscuit jointer. I know when I did my Domino videos earlier in the year, I got a bit of pushback from people when I called it essentially a free tool, because what I meant by that was, obviously you have to pay for it, but if you keep it for long enough, then the standard Festool price increases and inflation generally reduces the cost of that tool over time. And in fact, I'm pretty sure I paid £425 for my Domino. I'm pretty sure, I'd be shocked actually if I couldn't get that for it now. I'm sure I'd get more than that for it. So it is, after 10 years of use, essentially a free tool if you can get back what you pay for it. And I see the Lamello Zeta very much going the same way. Like the Domino, there's effectively no used market for it. They very, very rarely come up on eBay. I've been keeping an eye out for them for the last sort of year or so, or 18 months, which is why I've decided to jump in now. And the ones that do come up on eBay used tend to go very close to the new price. I've got the 50th anniversary edition, which comes in a sustainer with a few other bells and whistles. Some of the little jigs and things would normally be extras for that. I bought mine from the nice guys at Pro Trade, and I think they're doing the 50th anniversary edition, including VAT, for the same price, the same pre-VAT price as the basic Zeta. So it's a very good buy at the moment. Give the guys at ProTrade a quick call. There's a link in the video description down below. And in short, I don't expect to lose money on the Zeta no matter how long I keep it for. It's an interesting tool that opens up a whole host of other possibilities with other connectors that I hadn't really considered because they just weren't on my radar. If you watch Joey Chalk over at King Post Timberworks, he's doing some very interesting things with a connector called Divario. Again, I hadn't really sort of thought about it, but because it's a biscuit jointer, because it's got a spinning blade as a cutter, you can actually use it to cut long T-slots. And with the Divario connectors, you cut a T-slot in the side of a shelf, put the connectors on the carcass, and then you slide the shelf over the connectors, and it ties the whole thing together. Really interesting. Surprisingly not cheap, but really, really interesting. And as I say, there's going to be a whole host of things that I'll be taking a look at going forwards, not least of which I want to take a closer look at the knockdown connectors. I want to compare the Climax connectors with the Domino connectors as well, because they take a very different approach, the two knockdown connectors. But that's it for this week, though. I hope you've enjoyed this whistle-stop first impressions of the Lamello Zeta P2. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time. Take care.